There comes a time when blaming the world starts to lose its persuasive power. At first, the fault seemed obvious. That boss who never saw your worth, the family that never understood you, the society that always disappointed. But as time drags on and nothing changes, not outside, not within, the question begins to haunt. What if the real saboteur has your face? This moment is frightening, not because it's loud, but because it's silent. You realize that your sharpest criticisms may have served not as tools for justice, but as armor for a fragile ego unwilling to grow. It's easier to sound noble while pointing fingers than to look in the mirror and admit, I may be the reason I'm stuck. There is a specific kind of cowardice that wears the costume of critical thinking. It analyzes everything, questions everyone, but never turns the spotlight inward. It knows all the theories, all the faults of others, all the reasons why nothing works except its own complicity. And in this theater of blame, we lose the one thing that could actually transform us: moral courage. This isn't the naive courage of affirmations and confidence boosts. It's the terrifying bravery of recognizing our own hypocrisy, of admitting that we've contributed to the mess we hate. Because until we do, we're not agents of change. We're fugitives from responsibility. Philosophically, this is the starting point of real maturity. Accepting that we are not just products of the world, but also co-authors of our own reality. As Viktor Frankl teaches, even in the most oppressive circumstances, we are still free to choose our stance. And sometimes the stance we need most is one of humble confrontation. So here's the first question we must ask with brutal sincerity. What if the problem is not out there anymore? What if the real battlefield is the one I've been avoiding inside me? Before we continue, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever felt trapped in a cycle of blaming without changing? Share your experience in the comments. Like the video if this resonates with you, and subscribe so we can keep digging deeper into these questions that shape a meaningful life. There's a subtle moment when frustration stops being a signal and starts becoming a weapon. It usually begins with disappointment. Someone fails us. A goal escapes. Life unfolds differently than expected. The discomfort is real, but instead of turning inward, we lash outward. We critique, we blame, we denounce. Not because the world is truly the cause of our suffering, but because it's safer to project than to reflect. Projection is an ancient defense. When the chaos within becomes unbearable, we look for a screen outside to cast our shadows. It's not always conscious. Sometimes it comes dressed as social critique, righteous anger, or noble indignation. But underneath, there's often a refusal to face a deeper, more uncomfortable truth. Perhaps I'm not as coherent, not as brave, not as whole as I pretend to be. This is where the disorder begins to replicate itself. The more we attack the external world, the more we neglect the internal reordering we truly need. We become experts in pointing out the rot in others while silently ignoring the termites inside our own foundations. And slowly, the character corrodes. Psychologically, this mechanism is well known. Freud described it, Jung explored it. But it's not just theory. You can feel it in the way certain irritations become obsessive, certain people feel unbearable, certain situations seem to repeat endlessly. It's the soul trying to escape a mirror by throwing stones at windows. But philosophy offers a different path. The Stoics, for example, insisted that the external world is not within our control, only our response to it is. That doesn't mean injustice doesn't exist. It means our first duty is to become just within ourselves. Before we denounce the noise outside, we must silence the chaos within. So the practical step here is simple yet difficult. When frustration arises, ask, is this truly about them? Or is this revealing something unresolved in me? Make this a habit. Every external complaint should become an internal inquiry. This is not about blame. It's about authorship. Because only those who stop hiding behind excuses can start living with purpose. And until we stop projecting, we'll keep spinning in circles, mistaking motion for progress. We've grown used to associating suffering with external wounds, a past trauma, a difficult relationship, a failure that left marks. But not all pain comes from the outside. Some suffering is born from a deeper, quieter illness, the gradual decay of our own character. Yes, character can get sick. Just like the body weakens without discipline, the moral core atrophies when we stop nourishing it with truth, responsibility, and virtue. What starts as a small concession, a lie here, an excuse there, a bit of envy, a sprinkle of self-pity, slowly transforms into a structure of dysfunction, one that we start to inhabit as if it were normal. And here lies the danger. This inner illness rarely stays contained. It spills. It poisons relationships, corrodes trust, sabotages work, and spreads to others like smoke in a closed room. The bitterness we carry becomes the tone of our words. The pride we refuse to name becomes the distance in our friendships. The ego we protect becomes the wall that isolates us from any real growth. This idea is uncomfortable, especially in a time when we're told to endlessly validate our feelings and affirm our worth no matter what. But what if some of our pain is not the result of wounds, but of refusing to grow? What if it's not about what the world did to us, but about who we're becoming in response? St. Augustine once said, "The punishment of sin is sin itself." In other words, the very consequence of choosing wrongly is the person you become as a result. And if we allow our inner world to be guided by resentment, self-indulgence, or cowardice, we are not just suffering, we are deforming. Psychiatry recognizes this too. Some pathologies aren't the result of external trauma, but of accumulated moral choices gone unchecked. Narcissism, for example, isn't born overnight. It's sculpted by years of self-absorption, rewarded and never confronted. So here's the challenge. When you're in pain, ask not only what happened to me, but who am I becoming through this? What attitudes am I reinforcing? What patterns am I spreading? Character is not fixed. It grows or decays. And it's not just your life that's affected. Everyone near you breathes the air you exhale. Make it clean. Make it honest. There's a particular exhaustion that comes not from action, but from motion without direction. You feel tired, burned out even, yet nothing truly changes. You read, you reflect, you talk, but the patterns remain. Same frustrations, same arguments, same self-sabotage. The truth? You're not moving forward. You're spinning in place. This is the hidden cost of avoiding the moral mirror. We often mistake intellectual engagement for transformation, but no amount of insight compensates for the refusal to confront personal vice. We quote philosophers, analyze trauma, discuss systemic flaws, all valuable, yes, but still manage to sidestep the simplest, most brutal question: what in me needs to die for something better to be born? The ego is a master of illusion. It keeps us orbiting around the same issues while convincing us we're evolving. It swaps out partners, jobs, ideologies, yet preserves our deepest defects. Like a planet locked in orbit, we mistake repetition for progress. And the longer we avoid the mirror, the more we mistake dysfunction for identity. Philosophically, this is the difference between knowing and becoming. Plato pointed to the soul's ascent toward the good, but only through purification, a confrontation with what is false and disordered within. Without this cleansing, we can climb intellectual mountains and still live morally crippled. Psychologically, the mirror is not a metaphor, it's a necessity. Jung emphasized that without facing the shadow, the unconscious will continue to direct our lives, and we'll call it fate. In other words, if you don't name your patterns, they'll keep writing your story for you. And here's the practical trap: self-justification. I'm like this because of what I went through. People don't change. I've already tried. These are the mantras of the morally stagnant: comfortable, familiar, safe, and paralyzing. So ask yourself, what am I pretending not to know about myself? What truth have I silenced for so long that I now call it personality? The real transformation begins not with new techniques, but with old honesty. Not with adding more, but by daring to subtract illusions, excuses, narratives that keep you exactly where you are. Look into the mirror, not to criticize, but to reclaim. Because stagnation is not rest, it's decay dressed in comfort. St. Thomas Aquinas once wrote that virtue is not an occasional act, but a stable disposition toward the good. In other words, becoming virtuous is not about having moments of clarity or bursts of moral strength. It's about habit, deliberate, conscious repetition of what is right until it becomes who you are. This insight may seem underwhelming at first. In a world obsessed with breakthroughs and emotional highs, the idea of slow, methodical formation feels boring. But that's precisely why so many remain stuck. They chase inspiration instead of formation. They want to feel better before they become better. Aquinas challenges this deeply modern impulse. For him, character is built like a cathedral, stone by stone, choice by choice, often in silence, often unseen. And it's this long obedience in the same direction that protects us from self-deception. Why does this matter? Because we often confuse sincerity with virtue. We think that because we mean well, we are well. But Aquinas would ask, how often do your actions align with your stated values? How consistent are your choices when no one is watching? What habits govern your mornings, your reactions, your thoughts? From a clinical perspective, we now know that neural pathways are shaped by repetition. Your brain, quite literally, becomes what you do consistently. So if your daily routine is filled with distraction, self-indulgence, or blame, you're not just having bad days, you're forming a bad character. But here's the hope. The inverse is also true. Every time you resist a destructive impulse, every time you choose silence over gossip, gratitude over complaint, action over paralysis, you are rewiring your soul. And over time, those small, almost invisible acts form something unshakable: integrity. So how do we start? Not by overhauling everything overnight. Aquinas teaches moderation, not in the sense of mediocrity, but of balance. Choose one vice, one repeated weakness, and consciously oppose it daily with its corresponding virtue. Sloth, practice diligence. Pride, practice humility. Bitterness, practice mercy. You don't need to be perfect. You need to be in formation. Because in the end, character is not built by waiting for a better life to arrive. It's built by choosing to live better, one act at a time until the habit becomes the person, and the person becomes a witness of the good. What do you do when pain arrives uninvited and unexplainable? When you didn't choose the suffering, but now it's yours to carry? In these moments, the modern instinct is to collapse into complaint or search frantically for someone to blame. But Viktor Frankl offers us a radically different path. Choose your attitude. Frankl, a psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, discovered this truth in the most brutal of places, the Nazi concentration camps. Stripped of everything, surrounded by death, he realized that the last human freedom is the ability to choose one's stance in the face of what cannot be changed. His insight was not theoretical. It was forged in agony, and it remains one of the most profound contributions to human maturity. Suffering is not only something to endure, it is something to respond to. But let's be honest, this is deeply uncomfortable. We want to believe that if we're suffering, we are automatically morally justified, automatically right. And yes, many suffer unjustly. But Frankl reminds us that victimhood does not sanctify passivity. Pain gives you a platform, but not a posture. You still have to choose how to stand. This is the heart of radical responsibility, refusing to let circumstances define the meaning of your life. It's the courage to say, I did not ask for this, but I will not let it deform me. Or as Frankl would put it, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. This is not about denial. It's about dignity. It's about reclaiming authorship in the one place where you are never powerless, your inner world. Philosophically, this echoes the ancient Stoics. Epictetus, born a slave, taught that external conditions are beyond us, but our moral purpose is always ours to uphold. Responsibility, then, is not a burden, it is our most human capacity. So here's your challenge. When suffering visits, don't ask only, why me? Ask instead, who do I choose to become because of this? That shift can transform anguish into character, despair into meaning. Because in the end, suffering will visit all of us. But what it does to you depends entirely on what you do with it. Insight without action is a form of self-deception. We nod along, feel understood, even inspired, and then forget. the cycle repeats. That's why real transformation requires a practical rhythm, one that interrupts our autopilot and forces us to reckon with our choices. Not in theory, but in detail. And that's where the weekly inventory comes in. Here's how it works. Once a week, preferably the same day and time, but you sit down with a notebook and brutal honesty. No filters, no sugarcoating. Just this question. What did I do this week, and what did I avoid doing that shaped the person I am becoming? Begin with actions. Look at your week, not through the lens of tasks completed, but of character expressed. Did you show patience when provoked? Did you avoid a difficult conversation out of fear? Did you follow through on what you said, or make convenient excuses? List them, own them, let them speak, then move to omissions. This is where the deeper truth often hides. What opportunities did you ignore? Who did you fail to encourage? What virtue did you postpone yet again? Not because you couldn't act, but because it was uncomfortable. This is not about guilt. It's about clarity. About seeing plainly and without drama the habits that are forming your moral trajectory. Because every decision leaves a residue, and if we don't take time to observe the accumulation, we wake up one day shaped by impulses we never consciously chose. From a psychological standpoint, this practice increases metacognition, your ability to think about your thinking. It trains the prefrontal cortex, the seat of reason and moral judgment. From a spiritual standpoint, it's an examination of conscience, a practice of many classical traditions, aimed not at shame, but at sanctity. Here's the key. Don't just reflect. Write. Naming things gives them weight. Patterns become visible. Repetition becomes measurable. Over time, this inventory becomes a mirror, not of who you wish to be, but of who you're actually becoming. So start this week. Choose a time. Be consistent. Ask hard questions. Write honest answers. And remember, transformation doesn't begin with grand gestures. It begins with a quiet, consistent look in the mirror and the courage to respond. Imagine someone puts poison in a cup and offers it to you. You know it's toxic. You know it will harm you. But instead of refusing, you hold it, stare at it, and drink slowly, every day. That's what we do with certain thoughts, with certain narratives, with moral poisons we've come to call truth. Life wounds. People fail us. Injustice happens. That's real. But what we do after the wound is where the tragedy deepens or begins to heal. Because far more damaging than what happens to us is what we choose to feed inside us afterward. That inner monologue, resentful, bitter, accusatory, is not a response. It's a rehearsal. And like all rehearsals, it forms habits. We sip the poison of indignation. We drink the venom of entitlement. We swallow the slow acid of comparison, pride, envy. And over time, our soul becomes what we consume. Here's the paradox. We believe we're being strong by holding on to these thoughts. We think they protect us, define us, keep us sharp, but they actually keep us small. They calcify the wound into identity. They turn pain into posture, and posture into prison. Viktor Frankl wrote that between stimulus and response there is a space, and in that space lies our power to choose. That space is where the cup is offered. The thought arises, I was wronged. Yes, maybe you were. But the next thought is yours to shape. Will you poison your character in response, or purify it? This metaphor is not an exaggeration. From a neurological standpoint, repeated thoughts strengthen certain neural pathways. Bitterness practiced becomes automatic. Gratitude practiced becomes natural. Your internal world, your mental, emotional, and moral landscape, is being built by the thoughts you allow to stay. So practically ask yourself, what cups am I still drinking from that I should have thrown away long ago? What thoughts am I calling truth that are actually chains? What pain have I turned into identity? You may not control the wounds, but you always control the cup. Don't drink what deforms you. Don't nourish what destroys you. Choose carefully what you let live inside, because that is what you become. Fyodor Dostoevsky understood something most modern psychology avoids. The path to maturity is not upward, but inward, and often downward, into the subsoil of the soul. into the parts we'd rather not see. The shadow, as Jung would later call it. That dark mass of selfishness, pride, fear, and unredeemed pain we keep buried under roles, opinions, and distractions. In Notes from Underground, Dostoevsky gives voice to a man who has retreated entirely into this shadow, bitter, hyper-aware, paralyzed by his own contradictions. He is not a villain. He is us, without masks. And through him, Dostoevsky forces us to ask, what if the greatest suffering is not what others have done to you, but what you refuse to face within yourself? This is not a comfortable truth, but it is liberating. Because if we are willing to look into the darkness, well, not just the world's, but ours, we begin to understand what truly holds us back. Not fate, not luck, not even our history, but the lies we keep repeating to ourselves about who we are and what we deserve. The confrontation with the shadow is terrifying precisely because it strips away our excuses. It reveals that our greatest enemy is not rejection or failure, but self-deception. And paradoxically, it is in this confrontation that real freedom begins. Because now, finally, you are no longer at war with a ghost. You see clearly, and what is seen can be healed. Dostoevsky's genius lies in showing us that this descent is not a fall. It is a pilgrimage into the depths where truth hides, into the furnace where character is forged, into the soil where humility takes root and real love becomes possible. From a therapeutic angle, this is the work of integration. The parts of you you've denied must be seen, named and reconciled, not indulged, but not ignored. Only then do you stop projecting your darkness onto others and start assuming responsibility for your own soul. So ask yourself, what parts of me have I buried because they frightened me? What inner voices have I silenced that still govern my actions? What would happen if I stopped fearing my shadow and started learning from it? Because in the end, maturity is not the absence of darkness, but the willingness to enter it, guided by the light of truth. Let's be honest. Everyone fails. We betray our values. We say what we shouldn't. We act out of fear, pride, or cowardice. The question is not whether we'll fall. It's what we do afterward. And this is where true dignity begins. Not in perfection, but in ownership. Moral courage is not the illusion of flawlessness. It's the posture of someone who, even after falling, refuses to run from the wreckage they caused. They kneel, not in shame, but in truth. They look at the damage and say, yes, I did this, but I will not hide. I will not lie. I will begin again. From here. There is something breathtakingly noble in a person who names their failure without excuse, who doesn't shift blame, twist the narrative, or vanish behind a mask of pride. That kind of courage is rare, because it costs everything the ego wants to protect. But it's also the doorway to real transformation. St. Thomas Aquinas taught that contrition, true sorrow for wrongdoing, is not weakness, it is strength, because it requires seeing oneself clearly and still choosing to act in the direction of the good. It's the paradox of humility. You lower yourself, not to disappear, but to build on firmer ground. In psychological terms, this is the essence of integration. The more parts of you you're willing to face, especially the broken ones, the stronger, freer, and more authentic you become. Because now, there are no secrets to defend, no illusions to maintain, just a life being rebuilt honestly from the inside out. And here's the hope. When you start living like this, you give others permission to do the same. Your courage becomes contagious. Your responsibility inspires. Your honesty heals not just you, but the people around you. So ask yourself with gentleness but with firmness, what failure am I still running from? What truth have I avoided because it carries my name? And then, stop. Turn around. Face it. Because courage is not loud. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a quiet decision to no longer lie to yourself, to stand in the ruins of your own mistakes, and build. If this reflection spoke to something inside you, leave a comment sharing what you're ready to face. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's continue growing. Not by pretending to be flawless, but by refusing to flee from the truth.